Good morning, my name is Nicola Pierce. I'm an author of 4 historical novels, and we're making this video today just so I can introduce you to the events I do. I'm very lucky I get invited to do an awful lot of events in schools and libraries, and so really I just want to give you a taste of what the events involve. So my first book that came out was Spirit of the Titanic, and this book was released in 2011, and so far it's been my most commercially successful book to date. It sold something in the region of 40,000 copies, which is nothing compared to Harry Potter or David Williams, but it's something that I get excited about. And how the book came about was back in 2010, the Obrien Press rang me and asked me would I do a book on the Titanic. Now, I am a full-time writer, and by that stage I'd written 15 or 16 books, but it is really scary when a writer is asked to write a story that everybody knows the ending to. So I had to try and find a different way of telling the story of the Titanic. And at this point in an event, I'd normally ask a class how many have read John Boyne's The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas, because John Boyne took a subject that we knew loads about, but he found a very unique way of telling that story, and that's what I was hoping to do with this book here. So it just so happened that I knew the very first Titanic death did not happen in 1912 when the ship sank. It actually happened 2 years beforehand. Samuel Joseph Scott, he was just 15 years of age, and he worked in Harland and Wolff as a catch boy, which was a junior member of the rivet team. Now, in my events, I use photographs to illustrate the point. So when I'm talking about the Titanic, the event will last for about an hour, about 15 minutes to an hour, and I will show about 30 photographs to illustrate the talk, and I do that for all the books. So this would be the first photograph I'd show with the Titanic talk. So we have Titanic here, and we have 2 older members of the rivet team. So Samuel Joseph Scott was a catch boy. He's the junior member of the rivet team, which means his job is to get the rivet, which would be about that big, to where these 2 fellas are going to hammer it into shape. And it was a very dangerous job, the catch boy. 8 people died in the 2 years it took to make the Titanic, and 2 of them were catch boys, because Samuel's job was to get the rivet to wherever these 2 fellas are. Now in this photograph, it's not that dangerous. This is the very bottom of Titanic, and you see the 2 men hammering in rivets, but of course the ship was going to get a lot taller than that. So I used the ghost of Samuel Joseph Scott. He fell to his death on the 20th of April 1910. He fell 23 feet from a ladder at the side of Titanic. So I think to myself, these 2 fellows must have been up higher. We have Titanic here, she's being built, and the 2 older riveters could have been somewhere around there. Now, he fell to death in April, so maybe the weather was wet, so all the wood, the scaffolding was wet. Maybe he slipped, missed his footing, fell to the ground, and he died immediately of a fractured skull and ended up buried in Belfast City Cemetery. And I use his ghost to narrate the story of what happened that night. Now, the most exciting thing that has happened to me so far, I think, in my entire writing career is Samuel Joseph Scott, this 15-year-old, was lying in an unmarked grave for 101 years. And he was lying in Belfast City Cemetery. There was a man who does tours in Belfast City Cemetery, and he knew about my book. And I went up to find Samuel's grave. I couldn't find it. The guy had to show me where it was because it was unmarked, which means there's no headstone available. So I just asked this guy who did the tours in Belfast City Cemetery, was there any way we could mark the grave? And thanks be to goodness, it was just wonderful. I said it to him, he said it to a friend of his who just happened to know a guy who runs one of the big festivals, the West Belfast Festival, and they rang me a few weeks later and told me they were putting a headstone up on Samuel's grave. So here we have Samuel Scott. Here lies the remains of Samuel Joseph Scott, age 15, who departed this life on the 20th of April 1910 in a work accident during the building of the Titanic, remembering his soul and all those who perished in the sinking of the Titanic. And here we have the words "Nearer, my God, to Thee," which was probably the last piece of music that the band was playing as the ship was going down. Now, I love this photograph. I used to carry a photograph of the headstone, and there was nothing there except for a little angel I had bought when the headstone was being unveiled. But this photograph was just taken about a year and a half ago, which shows me today that people are going up to visit the grave, and it makes me really happy. So that would be the beginning of the Titanic talk. I just start how the narrated story. It's kind of the main job of the writer. Once you know the story that you're about to tell, your next job is to decide who's going to narrate the story. So I use the ghost of Samuel Joseph Scott, and that's why the book is called The Spirit of the Titanic. And after that, then I move into the bigger story to do with the passengers and the crew, and within the hour tell as much as I can of what happened that night and how it played a part in my research and telling the story in this book. So that's the Titanic talk. Now, my second book is City of Fate. This came out in 2014, and this is my World War II book. And how this happened was, I didn't realise, I wasn't prepared. Titanic comes out and I end up all over Ireland talking about the Titanic. In 2012 I basically lived out of a suitcase. I was like you two in the 1980s. I was even over in the Irish College in Paris talking about this book. I did not know that Paris had an Irish college, but there I was. Meanwhile, Obrien Press are ringing me, asking me what the second book is going to be about and when I'm going to start writing it. So I missed several deadlines, but I decided to wanted to do a book about World War II. And it was a friend that said to me, why don't you write about the Battle of Stalingrad? Now, I knew nothing about the Battle of Stalingrad, so that meant I had to do a whole lot of research. And within probably an hour of that research, I decided that I was going to write this book, because it turns out that the Battle of Stalingrad, which is a battle that was fought in Russia, Hitler sent his army in to invade the much bigger country of Russia midway through World War II. And it turns out that the Battle of Stalingrad is the most important battle of World War II, because this was the first time that the Nazis, the Germans, would be beaten. And they weren't just beaten in Stalingrad, the army was utterly demolished. So I wanted to tell the story from the point of view of a civilian in Stalingrad, and also as a brand new soldier. And I try as much as I can not to make up characters. Now when I have to, I will. But I went looking for new soldiers, or a story to do with brand new soldiers. And I found this true story. There was a teacher in a small school in Russia. He had a class of 30 16-year-old boys. At some point he receives an order from the Russian police telling him he's to bring the entire class to the next town, enroll them in the army, and they're going to go straight into Stalingrad, into the middle of a war, and start fighting Nazis. This would have been the scariest words they'd ever known. Now there wouldn't be any time to train them, absolutely no training, and also there weren't enough guns to go around in Russia or for the Russian army. So they would have been told, when you get into Stalingrad, you just walk yourself up to a German soldier and take his gun. Easy peasy. By the time the teacher got his class to the registry office, only 15 boys were standing with him. In other words, 15 fellas had gotten scared and ran off, and you cannot blame them. They were being removed from the classroom and put into the middle of a war without any training. Now we cannot find out what happened to that teacher. I've looked up, and several historians have reckoned that that teacher was probably punished for not turning up with 30 as he had been ordered, even though it was not his fault. 15 fellas got scared and ran off. So I've taken 5 boys that would have gone into Stalingrad. Now I couldn't find out any of their names, so I had to make up their names. But I've tried to imagine what it's like to be a brand new soldier going into the middle of a war and have to deal with this as a 16-year-old, that if you don't try to kill the person who's coming at you, they're going to try and kill you. In my head, that's got to be a huge thing to digest, and to digest as quick as possible. So that's what half the book follows, these 5 students that went straight into Stalingrad. The other half, I did a lot of research and I came up with 3 stories. I took a 5-year-old boy, a 14-year-old boy, and a 17-year-old girl, and I really am just trying to show them trying to exist in a city that has been ripped apart day after day by 2 huge armies. Now, if you ever see anything to do with the Battle of Stalingrad, you will always be shown this. It turns up in every documentary and every film, and it's called the Bramley Fountain. And this is how I suppose I would always try to use the place as a character in my novel. So Titanic played a huge part in the novel, obviously, and in this I'm trying to use the city of Stalingrad, and in particular this fountain. We've got 3 boys, 3 girls laughing and dancing around a crocodile. Now, it's a gift from South Africa, and it's sat in one of the most dangerous places throughout the battle, which is in front of the train station. And in my novel, my 5-year-old Peter needs to go and look at the statue day after day, because no matter how scary things got and how terrified he got, these children never stopped laughing and dancing. So in a way, it sort of gave him inspiration. So I will always start my talk about the City of Fate. The Battle of Stalingrad begins with showing this, and again I move into the greater story of the battle and discuss how I researched and wrote the book as I went. So that's the second book, my World War II book, The Battle of Stalingrad, which is called City of Fate. Now we come to my third book. This is Behind the Walls, and it's about the 1688 Siege of Derry. Now, I know this doesn't sound very exciting, and I know after listening about the Titanic and listening about World War II, I mean, I know as the writer that I really have to push my last 2 books hard, and I suppose I always do mention them together. So we've got Behind the Walls, which is about the Siege of Derry in 1688 to 1689, and it finishes exactly the year before the Battle of the Boyne. So my Kings of the Boyne is my newest book, and it is sort of a sequel to this book, so I like to discuss the 2 of them together. The Siege of Derry, just to keep it simple, an anonymous letter is found on a street in Down, County Down, and that anonymous letter is informing every single Protestant in the north of Ireland in 1688 that they have 2 days left to live, because every Catholic is going to rise up and murder them all. Now, Derry is getting very nervous. Derry is a garrison city in the north, which means that whoever sits on the throne of England, their army lives in Derry. Now, that's all well and good when the king is a Protestant king. That's fine, and there's a Protestant army in Derry. Now, there were Catholics living in Derry too, but predominantly it was a Protestant population. But now what happens is James II ends up on the throne after his brother dies, and James is a Catholic. Now, that would have been fine if James had been told, look, we really don't want you to be king, but as long as you keep quiet about your religion, it's fine. We've got nobody else here, so yes, you can be king, but just keep quiet about your religion. And James probably said yes, and then does the exact opposite as soon as he sits on the throne. He starts building Catholic churches the length of England. He starts having crucifixes put up left, right and centre. And worse than that, he has taken jobs off Protestants and giving them to his Catholic friends. Talk about going out of your way to commit trouble. Now, we've got Derry, the garrison city, Protestant city, and their Protestant army has been asked to go down to Dublin on whatever makey-up excuse. And now there's rumours in Derry that James is going to have their army replaced with a Catholic army. Now, do you believe the rumours? And then what happens when this letter is read out on the 7th of December? That informs everybody they've got 2 days left to live. Obviously, there's going to be a bit of a panic. So the book concentrates on what happens, and what happens is this. There's a load of arguments going on. What do we do? James doesn't want to kill people. He's not really into killing people for no reason at all. But then you've got half the people probably saying, would you like to read that letter again where it says we've got 2 days left to live? So what do? In the midst of all the arguments, somebody looks out over the walls of Derry and sees the army coming. This Catholic army up to now had only been a rumour, and now here we go, there they are. Also, they were giants, because James had put this eccentric alpha in charge of collecting a new army, and this guy decides he only wants tall men, so he had to be 6 foot tall to be in this army. So you've got the nervous Protestants in Derry looking out and seeing this army and also going, oh my god, they're giants. So a load of argument ensues and debate, and you're going to have the bishops, you're going to have county council fellows back in 1688 arguing about what to do, because to lock the gates against a king's army is just something that it's too huge. But in fact, that is what happens. 13 young fellas go and lock the 4 gates of Derry. And that's brilliant. Once they lock the 4 gates of Derry, nobody can get in. But what happens is they've also locked their city away from fresh food and water. So what happens when you keep the gates locked and they start to run out of food 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks later? What happens when people start dying of starvation? Children probably first, and then you probably have the elderly and anyone that was sick. And then what happens when they run out of room in the graveyards, so that people are now dying on the streets, which means a spread of disease? And all the while, the Catholic army is saying, just let us in, we just wanted to take up residence. James kept sending in messages going, I was never going to punish anybody, you can still be Protestants, but just let my army come in. And they refused to let the army in. So the book is about what happens in Derry. That's why it's called Behind the Walls. This huge battle that went on inside. Do we keep the gates locked or do we open it out? And these, the population of Derry, they were so brave and they had to put up with so much, and it took a long time to receive any help. And I have a photograph here actually of the gates, the actual gates or the locks to the city. And I went up to Derry and actually got to hold these locks in my hand. So I wrote about the Titanic, I wrote about World War II, but I didn't get to touch anything to do with World War II or Titanic. I write about something that happens 300 years ago, and I get to hold a pocket watch in my hand. That was one of my main characters, Adam, was actually his watch back in 1689. It stopped about 20 to 4. It's 25 to 10 in the morning when I'm holding it in my hand. But this book, it means a huge amount to me, and Derry is one of my favourite places to visit. So that's my 3rd book about the Siege of Derry, called Behind the Walls. So the Kings of the Boyne, I've mentioned it before, and it is sort of a sequel to the Behind the Walls, because I take 2 characters, 2 of my favourite characters. The 13 apprentice boys, the young boys that locked the gates. When I was looking for characters, real characters put in my book, what jumped out at me was that 2 of them were brothers. And I knew about the debate. Do we keep the gates locked? Do we open them again? I don't think James is going to hurt us. And when I saw that two of them were brothers, I thought I can take that debate and move it into a house, into a single family, and have one brother more adamant than the other. We keep the gates locked, we are protecting our religion and protecting ourselves. The other brother, in my head, was more sensitive. Now, they were two fellas that actually lived and actually were involved in closing the gates, but that was all I knew about them. But in fact, out of all the 4 books, these 2 brothers were the easiest characters to develop. They just started talking to me immediately. So one brother's more sensitive, and he sees children dying from starvation, and he questions, should we not open the gates? I've brought them down and put them into the Battle of the Boyne. Now, for all I know, they did fight at the Battle of the Boyne. Most of the fellas in Derry, when William of Orange rescues Derry, most of Derry heads down to fight for William of Orange at the Battle of the Boyne against James II. So this is going to be the big clash between the Protestant William of Orange and the Catholic King James. So again, I always get nervous talking about this book because I feel I really have to sell it, because there's that fear that I'm going to talk in front of a class and go, I've written a book about the Battle of the Boyne, does that sound interesting? And half the class may go, no. So I have an event about it. I spend probably about 40 minutes talking about the Battle of the Boyne, and I go through various photographs and pictures, and then at the end of the book I introduce the cast of the royalty cast, and there's quite a few there. So what I do is I get children up and I give them placards of each. So somebody's holding up James II, somebody's holding up Queen Mary and King William, and I tell the rest of the story using the children holding up their portraits. So I urge you, it is an interesting event. It mightn't sound like a very interesting topic for a book, but I'm glad to say it has been receiving great reviews. But it is the book I feel I really have to get out there and push. Just to give you a taster again of the Battle of the Boyne event, this is the gorgeous River Boyne. Now, I live in Drogheda, so it's great. I just live 5 minutes away from this. And it occurred to me when I'd written all my books that if I was going to write another book about, or another story about the Battle of the Boyne, that I could use the river to narrate the story. You don't need to use a person to narrate a book. You can use the landscape. And I love thinking about that. The landscape holds on to all the memories. So the Boyne, the River Boyne, has watched the Battle of the Boyne. Belfast Lough watched the Titanic being built, and the Atlantic Ocean gets to watch its approach and slamming up against the iceberg. Stalingrad, Russian city, is now today called Volgograd, and sits on the gorgeous river Volga in Russia. And of course Derry sits on the beautiful River Foyle, and the River Foyle would have watched the Catholics doing their best to get into Derry. So that's just one aspect of this event, that I asked children to think about different ways of writing stories, and that you could use the landscape. So if I was going to ever do another book about the Battle of the Boyne, I could use the river to narrate the story. So that's the 4 books in full. Each event takes about an hour. I allow for questions, I'll sign books, I'll do anything. But also, if you don't want me to concentrate on just one book, I can do a talk which divides the 4 of them, 15-20 minutes each. Or I can do a talk that just concentrates on 2 of them, or just 3 of them. So really anything at all. Also, I've started doing workshops, writing workshops. And I normally concentrate on something from history. So I have a 9/11 workshop. And I did 1916. I haven't written about 1916, and I'm actually going around at the moment and I'm doing a workshop on the 1876 Battle of Little Bighorn, which is General Custer's last stand. Now that's as relevant, sadly today that is as relevant, and it's talking about the history of the Native American Indians and how badly they were treated because of progress. They were standing in the way of progress. Sadly that is going on today. I also do a writer's workshop on the Battle of Dunkirk. So that's this great big battle at the beginning of World War II, when Churchill has to rescue the British Army from France and get them home as fast as possible before Hitler decides he's going to attack Britain. So that's really what I do. Talks about my books and writer workshops, and I concentrate, because I write historical fiction, that is what I concentrate on, trying to show how easy it is, or how interesting it is to take something from history and make it come alive today. So I hope you've enjoyed my video, and I haven't talked too much. Thank you so much.